Williams really was America's first individualist, the first contradictor of authority, the first rebel.
Hi, I'm Nick Gillespie with ReasonTV, and today we're talking with John M. Barry, the author most recently of Roger Williams and the Creation of the American Soul, Church, State, and the Birth of Liberty. John Barry, thanks for talking to us.
A pleasure.
Roger Williams, who was he, and why are you writing about him?
Well, Williams was a 17th century Puritan minister, but he was really the father of the modern idea of liberty. And he's best known for religious freedom. But when I started writing the book, I very quickly realized that I was not simply writing about the emergence of the idea of religious liberty, but liberty itself.
Yeah, Roger Williams, I mean, some school kids, if they're lucky enough, they learn about him. He was kicked out of the Massachusetts Bay Colony, founded Providence, eventually got a charter for Rhode Island, wrote in favor of religious tolerance, or actually of a secular government where religion had no role to play. Describe his interest in religion.
Well, as I said, he was a devout Puritan minister. He was considered so godly that the instant he arrived in Boston, he was offered the ministry of the Boston Church, and he declined it because he did not think that church was pure enough for him. And yet at the same time, he felt that government had no role in interjecting itself between people and God.
Right, and a lot of people now worry that if religion and politics mix, politics suffers. His basic point was that when religion and politics or the state mix, religion
you have
suffers.
to corrupt the church. You cannot possibly keep the church pure if the politics gets anywhere near it.
He had very heartfelt ideas about the proper role of God and Scripture and all of that kind of stuff in his personal life, but he was a secularist in terms of civil government. And he also talked a lot about limiting the power of the state and of the magistrates and of the kings and all of that. Where did that come from?
Well, I think the most interesting stuff about him is the background. He was the amanuensis. He walked around taking notes of someone named Sir Edward Coke, whom very few people have heard of, but Coke was Chief Justice of England, the man who actually ruled the house of everyone is as his castle. And Coke stood for English liberty, and he's probably the single greatest jurist in English history.
And he's a guy who took on when King James was saying, you know what, I have a divine right of kings. He's like, hey, not so fast.
Right. They were James's apologists, who included Francis Bacon, were saying that the king was above the law, that notwithstanding an oath he takes at his coronation, he could change any law for a reason of state. And Coke ended up going to the Tower of London because he said no.
You talk in the book, and I mean, this is interesting. I mean, you say two things, both of which I think are equally true. One is that we always have to be very careful when we transpose history onto contemporary debates and arguments. But then you also point out that John Yoo actually quoted King James's...
Well, I didn't say that he quite quoted him, but used the identical arguments.
Right, which is that in times of extreme...
reason of state. I mean, you had in this period, you had state-sponsored terrorism. I mean, religious terrorism. The Catholics tried to assassinate King James, blow up Parliament with the king in it, and even in that context, when James tried to use arbitrary power, Coke stood up and said, no, you can't do that. And the ideas of liberty that Coke articulated ran in Williams's veins. They were very influential on his own views and his understanding. Plus, James was head of the Church of England. He was personally corrupt. Williams was in personal contact with James and with his son Charles, and he saw that corruption. The idea of these people part of the church was deeply offensive to him.
So in contemporary terms, now we live in a world where, or in an America where there's an ongoing war on terror that's in its second administration, and we have President, first it was Bush, now it's Obama, saying, look, I've got special powers now and I don't need to necessarily consult anybody. What is the enduring lesson of Roger Williams then for America?
Well, I think you're a nation of law or you're not. Use argument, which was, I think, outrageous. The Constitution does not apply. You italicized the word "not" in that, And that's an outrageous position. Of course the Constitution applies. We are a nation of laws.
Right. And how did things end up for Roger Williams? Because he famously gets kicked out, or he has to run. He's got it's like a Lynyrd Skynyrd song. He's got 2 steps to the door, I think, to get out of Massachusetts during a brutal winter, and he ends up in Providence. But how does his life play
founding
out?
Providence as what was easily the freest society in the world at the time.
He even bought land from the Indians.
He bought land from the Indians. The Indians saved his life when he fled. He believed in religious liberty so much, he actually convinced Cromwell to stop Massachusetts from compelling the Narragansett Indians to convert to Christianity. He said forced worship stinks in God's nostrils, and he compared it to spiritual rape.
Right.
He went from there as well to the idea of a secular state, because the state, he understood that if the state was going to get into religion at all, at some point in time, some human had to make a judgment about something to do with God. And he didn't think that's the way it worked.
So, I mean, Roger Williams offers up an alternative America possibility, one that is based on voluntary exchange, persuasion, kind of limited power. Did it ever have a chance of actually, I mean, we can think of a different world where we followed Roger Williams rather than people who were, forcing Indians off their land, pushing religion into the public square. Could it have ever happened that way?
Right from the beginning, there were 2 strands that, almost like the 2 strands of DNA that are wrapped around each other, that have run through American history. One is sort of the best known and probably more popular strand. People don't like to admit it, but it does involve compulsion and conformity. And you had this other strand. Williams really was America's first individualist, the first contradictor of authority, the first rebel. And if you're a rebel, almost by definition, you're in a minority position. But that idea has very much run through American history. It's not the dominant strand.
But it's persistent.
It is.
And it really, I think we can say we're both Roger Williams admirers. It energizes and creates the vitality in American culture.
I think so.
Roger Williams, when you start looking at where he was in history, the role that he played both in the English Civil War, in terms of theology, in terms of civil governance, this is a guy who everybody should know, and yet he is possibly best known for being the namesake of what is generally regarded one of the worst law schools in America. And why did he fade so far?
First, I think Americans don't look much at their history once you go back before the Revolution. I think there are very, very few figures pre-revolutionary time. In the academic community, however, he's probably one of the most written about, if arguably the most written about figure from our 17th century, but he's certainly not a household name. I would say when I started the book, it was funny, people would say, what, Roger Williams, you're writing about a musician? And in a sense, I was actually, because Roger Williams, a musician, was born Louis Wirtz. And he actually chose a name that to him represented America. And it's not an accident that he chose Roger Williams. It's not an accident that one of his most successful songs is Born Free.
Well, I want to thank John Barry for talking with Reason, and especially for writing Roger Williams and the Creation of the American Soul, Church, State, and the Birth of Liberty. It's well worth reading. It's an adventure novel as well as a history of an idea, really a powerful book. For Reason TV, I'm Nick Gillespie.